The manuscript hit Ifeoma Okonkwo's chest before sliding to the polished floor with a sound that echoed through the conference room like a gunshot. Papers scattered at her feet, 3 years of her soul bleeding across expensive marble tile. She didn't flinch, didn't bend to pick them up, just stood there, 5 feet from Director Kim Sun-ho's desk, her dark hands clenched at her sides, while 12 executives watched from their seats around the conference table like spectators at an execution. "This," Director Kim said, his voice carrying the particular contempt reserved for things beneath consideration, "is what passes for literature in your country?" He remained seated, fingers steepled, his position of power absolute. A story about racial confusion and identity crisis? You think Korean readers want to read about an African woman's complaints? Ifeoma's green eyes, inherited from a grandmother she'd never met, locked onto his without wavering. The tension in the room was suffocating. She could feel every executive holding their breath, waiting to see if the foreign woman would break, would apologize, would gather her rejected manuscript and disappear back to whatever corner of the world she'd crawled from. Instead, she smiled, cold and sharp as a blade. "I think," she said in perfect Korean, each word precise and deliberate, "Korean readers are tired of publishers who underestimate their intelligence. I think they're hungry for stories that challenge them instead of comforting them. And I think you're afraid of what happens when they discover you've been feeding them literary junk food while calling it cuisine." The room exploded into chaos. 3 executives gasped audibly. Someone's coffee cup shattered on the floor. The marketing director made a strangled sound like he was choking. But Ifeoma kept her eyes locked on Kim, watching his face transform from corporate condescension to volcanic fury. "How dare you?" Kim started to rise, his hands flat on the desk. "How dare I what?" Ifeoma stepped forward, her voice rising to match his anger. "Tell the truth? Point out that you rejected my manuscript before reading past page 3? That you've dismissed every foreign author who's walked through these doors for the past 5 years?" She gestured at her scattered pages. "You're not protecting Korean literature, Director Kim. You're strangling it." Kim's face had gone purple. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that no one seemed to know how to respond. This wasn't how these meetings went. Foreign authors were supposed to be grateful, humble, apologetic for taking up space in rooms that barely tolerated their presence. "Security!" Kim's voice cracked as he reached for his phone. "Get security up here now." "That won't be necessary." The voice came from the far end of the conference table, quiet but carrying enough authority to make Kim's hand freeze over the phone. Park Min-jun stood slowly, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the fluorescent lights. "Director Kim, I'd like to formally recommend Miss Okonkwo's manuscript for immediate publication." The silence that followed was deafening. Ifeoma's head snapped toward Min-jun, her expression shifting from defiant anger to shocked confusion. She'd met him exactly once, 3 weeks ago in a coffee shop in Gangnam, where he'd read her first chapter with an expression she couldn't interpret. He'd been polite, professional, non-committal. She'd assumed he was just another gatekeeper who would smile while slamming doors in her face. Now he stood in Director Kim's conference room, his usually composed face pale but determined, committing what Ifeoma recognized as professional suicide. "Mr. Park," Kim's voice could have etched glass. "Have you lost your mind?" "No, sir." Min-jun removed his glasses to clean them, and Ifeoma noticed his hands were shaking. "I think my mind has never been clearer. Miss Okonkwo's manuscript is exactly what this company needs. It's brave, uncomfortable, and absolutely brilliant. If we don't publish it, someone else will, and we'll have missed the opportunity to be part of something important." Kim moved around his desk with the predatory grace of someone used to destroying careers. "You're willing to stake your position here on this woman's work? Your entire future with this company?" Min-jun replaced his glasses and met Kim's glare without flinching. "Yes, sir. I am." "Then you're both dismissed." Kim's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "Miss Okonkwo, your manuscript is rejected. Mr. Park, clear out your office by end of day. I'll have HR send your termination paperwork within the hour." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ifeoma felt her stomach drop, felt 3 years of hope crumbling into ash. She'd come to Seoul to escape one scandal only to create another, and now she'd dragged down the one person who'd shown her an ounce of respect. But then Min Jun did something that made her heart stop. He walked over to where her manuscript lay scattered on the floor and knelt to gather the pages with careful reverence, straightening each sheet before stacking them neatly. When he stood, he held her work like it was precious, like it mattered. "Director Kim," Min Jun said quietly, "you can fire me. You can blacklist me from every publishing house in Seoul, but you can't erase the fact that you're on the wrong side of history. And someday, when Korean literature finally grows up enough to include voices that don't look like yours, people will remember who tried to stop it." He turned to Ifeoma, holding out her manuscript. "I meant what I said. This is brilliant, and I know someone who will publish it, even if Hansung won't." Ifeoma took her pages with trembling hands, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent electricity through her arm, a sensation she immediately tried to ignore. This wasn't the time for whatever her body thought was happening. "Get out!" Kim's voice was barely controlled fury. "Both of you. Now!" They walked out together, Min Jun's hand hovering near the small of her back without quite touching, a gesture of protection and solidarity that made Ifeoma's throat tighten. Behind them, she heard Kim barking orders, making phone calls, the machinery of institutional power grinding into motion to destroy them both. The elevator ride down 38 floors was silent except for the mechanical hum and Ifeoma's racing heartbeat. She kept stealing glances at Min Jun, trying to understand what had just happened. Why a successful Korean editor had thrown away his career for a manuscript by a woman he barely knew. When they reached the lobby, Min Jun finally spoke. "I'm sorry I dragged you into that scene. I should have been more strategic, more careful." "Strategic?" Ifeoma's laugh came out bitter and sharp. "You just committed career suicide for my book. That wasn't strategy. That was insanity." "Maybe." Min Jun pushed through the revolving doors into Seoul's late afternoon chaos. The November air was crisp and carried the smell of street food and car exhaust. "Or maybe I've spent my entire life being strategic, and it got me exactly nowhere that mattered." They stood on the sidewalk as commuters flowed around them like water around stones. Ifeoma clutched her manuscript to her chest, feeling the weight of what had just transpired settling into her bones. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why defend me like that?" Min Jun turned to look at her, and in the fading daylight, his eyes held something raw and vulnerable. "Because I read your manuscript. All 347 pages. Twice." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And because the protagonist, the Korean-American woman searching for her birth parents, she could have been writing my story. Every doubt, every fear, every moment of feeling like you don't belong anywhere completely." His voice cracked slightly. "How did you know? How did you capture that feeling so perfectly?" Ifeoma's breath caught. She'd researched transracial adoption obsessively for her novel, interviewed dozens of Korean adoptees in America, spent months trying to understand the particular pain of existing between worlds. But she'd never expected her work to wound someone like this, to strip away their defenses and leave them standing vulnerable on a Seoul sidewalk. "I didn't know," she said softly. I wrote what felt true, what felt honest. That's why it matters." Min Jun's intensity made her take a step back. That's why Kim is so afraid of it, because honest stories expose the lies we've been telling ourselves about who we are and who we could be. Before Ifeoma could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The DC area code made her stomach clench. She rejected it immediately, but not before Min Jun noticed her reaction. "Someone from home?" he asked. "Someone I left behind." Ifeoma shoved her phone into her bag. "Someone who thinks I owe him explanations I'll never give." Min Jun studied her face with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "The real reason you came to Seoul. It's not just about publishing a book, is it?" "No," Ifeoma admitted. "It's about being somewhere he can't find me. Somewhere I can finally tell my story without him controlling the narrative." Min Jun's voice sharpened. "This person who's calling you is exactly the kind of man who thinks brilliant women exist to make him look better." The words came out harsher than Ifeoma intended. "He's a professor, tenured, respected, everything I was supposed to become, until I made the mistake of being smarter than him in public." The late afternoon crowd pressed around them, thousands of people rushing toward subway stations and bus stops, everyone with somewhere to be. But Ifeoma and Min-jun stood still in the chaos, two people suddenly aware they'd stumbled into something that went far deeper than a manuscript rejection. "I have a friend," Min-jun said finally. "Runs a small independent press in Itaewon. Nothing like Hansung's prestige, but he publishes what matters instead of what sells. Let me set up a meeting." "Why are you helping me?" The question burst out before Ifeoma could stop it. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything, and now you've lost your job because of my manuscript." Min-jun smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Maybe I'm tired of playing it safe. Maybe I'm tired of being the good Korean son who follows every rule and meets every expectation." He adjusted his glasses. "Or maybe I just recognize someone else who's tired of apologizing for taking up space in a world that never wanted them in the first place." The words hit Ifeoma like a physical blow, because they were exactly what she'd been feeling for 3 years. Since the scandal at Howard, since Daniel's systematic destruction of her academic reputation, since she'd learned that being brilliant and black and female meant constantly managing other people's discomfort with your existence. "Coffee?" Min-jun asked. "There's a place near here where we can talk without half of Seoul's publishing industry watching." Ifeoma should have said no. Should have taken her manuscript and disappeared back to her tiny Hongdae apartment. Should have put distance between herself and this man who'd already proven he would burn his own life down on her behalf. But something in his eyes, the vulnerability, the recognition, the dangerous possibility that maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd thought, made her nod. "Coffee," she agreed. "But you're buying. Since you're unemployed now because of me." They walked together through Seoul's rush-hour crowds, and Ifeoma felt the first stirrings of something she'd promised herself she wouldn't feel again. Not after Daniel, not after Howard, not after learning that trusting people just gave them weapons to use against you. But Min-jun's shoulder brushed hers as they navigated the crowded sidewalk, and her phone buzzed again with another call from DC that she ignored, and Seoul stretched endlessly around them full of neon promise and dangerous possibilities. Maybe, she thought, hope wasn't about safety. Maybe it was about finding someone brave enough to burn alongside you when the world tried to silence your truth. The coffee shop in Itaewon was exactly what Ifeoma needed. Crowded enough to disappear, international enough that her presence didn't turn heads. Min-jun ordered in rapid Korean, then switched to English to confirm her preference. The linguistic code switching reminded her why she'd chosen Seoul. It was a city where everyone was performing some version of themselves, where the masks were expected. They claimed a corner table away from the windows. Min-jun set his phone face down like he was expecting bad news he didn't want to see immediately. "So," Ifeoma said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup, "tell me about the friend with the independent press." "Lee Jin-woo. We went to university together. He started his press 5 years ago with money from his grandmother. She was a poet, published back when female writers were expected to use male pseudonyms." Min-jun's expression softened with obvious affection. "Jin-woo publishes what the big houses won't touch. LGBTQ fiction, working-class narratives, anything that makes comfortable people uncomfortable. Sounds like my kind of publisher. There's a catch." Min-jun finally looked at his phone, wincing at whatever notifications covered the screen. "He's small. Marketing budget is basically social media and word of mouth. You won't get the distribution, the prestige, the money that Hansung could have offered." "I don't care about prestige," Ifeoma said. "I care about my story existing in the world, uncensored, unfiltered. If your friend can give me that, then money is secondary." Min-jun studied her across the small table. "You're different from most writers I've met. Usually they're willing to compromise everything for a chance at the big publishers. I already compromised once." The words came out harsher than Ifeoma intended. "At Howard, with Daniel, I let him edit my work, shape my arguments, tone down my conclusions because he said it would help my career. And then when my dissertation started getting more attention than his research, he used everything I'd shared with him to destroy me." "The plagiarism accusation?" Min-jun's voice was gentle. "You researched me." It wasn't a question. "I research all my authors. especially the ones brave enough to tell uncomfortable truths. He leaned forward. The charges were dropped eventually, right? Dropped, yes. But the damage was done. Academic reputation doesn't recover from accusations like that, even when they're proven false. Ifeoma's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Daniel planted evidence, manipulated colleagues, made sure everyone believed I'd stolen my best ideas from him. And by the time the truth came out, I'd already lost my position, my research funding, everything. So you came to Seoul. I ran to Seoul, Ifeoma corrected. There's a difference. Running implies you're still afraid. I was terrified. Minjun's phone buzzed repeatedly, but he ignored it. And now? Are you still terrified? Before Ifeoma could answer, her own phone lit up with a text message. Against her better judgment, she glanced at the screen. I know you're with that Korean editor. This won't end well for you, Ifeoma. Come home before you embarrass yourself further. -D. Her blood ran cold. Daniel knew about Minjun, which meant he was watching her somehow, tracking her movements even here in Seoul. The coffee shop suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. She scanned the crowd, looking for faces that didn't belong, for cameras pointed in their direction. What's wrong? Minjun noticed her reaction immediately. He knows about you, Ifeoma said, showing him the text. Daniel, he's somehow monitoring me here. Minjun's expression darkened as he read the message. How is that possible? I don't know. Maybe he hired someone. Maybe he's hacked my accounts. Daniel has money, connections, the kind of resources that make stalking look like concern. She felt panic rising in her chest. I thought I'd be safe here. I thought 8,000 miles would be enough distance. Hey. Minjun reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers without quite touching. You are safe. We'll figure this out. We? Ifeoma pulled her hand back. There is no we. You just lost your job defending me, and now you're getting pulled into my mess with Daniel? You should walk away while you still can. What if I don't want to walk away? The question hung between them, loaded with implications Ifeoma wasn't ready to examine. She'd known this man for 3 weeks. One coffee meeting, a handful of emails about her manuscript, and now this disastrous confrontation with Director Kim. This wasn't the foundation for trust, for partnership, for whatever Minjun seemed to be suggesting. But then his phone buzzed again, and this time he looked at it. His face went pale. What is it? Ifeoma asked. Message from Director Kim. He's not just firing me. He's blacklisting me from the entire Seoul publishing industry. Minjun's voice was hollow. He's already contacted every major house, told them I'm professionally unstable, that I violated company ethics by pursuing a personal relationship with an author. That's not true. We don't have a personal relationship. Doesn't matter. In Korean business culture, the accusation is enough. Minjun set his phone down carefully, like it might explode. By tomorrow morning, I'll be unemployable in my field. Guilt crashed over Ifeoma like a wave. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't challenged Kim, if I'd just kept quiet. If you'd kept quiet, I would have spent the rest of my career wondering what I could have been if I'd had the courage to stand up for something that mattered. Minjun's eyes met hers with fierce intensity. I don't regret defending you, Ifeoma. I regret all the times before today when I didn't defend authors who deserved it. The use of her first name felt intimate, a boundary crossed. Ifeoma realized they'd shifted from professional acquaintances to something far more complicated. Two people whose lives had collided and tangled in ways neither had anticipated. So what do we do now? She asked. Minjun smiled, and there was something reckless in his expression. Now? We call Jin Woo. We publish your book, and we show Director Kim and everyone else who thinks they can silence uncomfortable voices that some stories refuse to stay buried. Outside the coffee shop window, Seoul's evening lights began flickering to life, neon signs and street lamps painting the city in shades of possibility. Ifeoma thought about the manuscript in her bag, about Daniel's threatening texts, about this Korean editor who'd thrown away his career on her behalf. She thought about courage and fear, about the difference between running away and running towards something worth fighting for. Okay, she said, let's burn it all down. Minjun's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. The independent press occupied the third floor of a converted building in Itaewon, its walls covered with book posters that celebrated voices Seoul's mainstream publishers ignored. Lee Jin-woo greeted them with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for a fight worth having. He was shorter than Min-jun, with dyed silver hair and multiple piercings that would have scandalized director Kim's corporate sensibilities. "So you're the author who got Min-jun fired," Jin-woo said, shaking Ifeoma's hand with genuine warmth. "I like you already." "That's one way to make an introduction," Ifeoma replied, surprised by how immediately comfortable she felt. Jinwoo led them to a cluttered office where manuscripts competed for space with coffee cups and art books. He cleared 2 chairs with casual efficiency, gesturing for them to sit while he perched on the edge of his desk. "Min Jun sent me your first 3 chapters last week," Jinwoo said, pulling up files on his laptop. "I stayed up until 4 in the morning reading them. Then I read them again. Then I called my grandmother and told her I'd found the book that was going to define my press." Ifeoma felt tears prickling behind her eyes. After years of rejection, after director Kim's contempt, hearing genuine enthusiasm for her work felt like oxygen after drowning. "I want to publish it," Jinwoo continued. "Full manuscript, minimal edits, your vision protected. I can't offer you Hansung money, but I can offer you something better. Complete creative control and a publisher who actually believes in what you've written." "When?" The word came out as barely a whisper. 6 months if we push hard. Korean translation simultaneous with English release. I have a translator who specializes in preserving voice across languages. She's brilliant. You'll love her. Jinwoo's excitement was infectious. "We'll launch at the Seoul International Book Fair. Make it an event that the big publishers can't ignore." Minjun leaned forward. "Jinwoo, there's something else. Director Kim is going to try to block this. He's already blacklisting me, and he'll come after Ifeoma next." "Let him try." Jinwoo's smile was sharp. Kim's power exists in the establishment. But independent presses don't play by establishment rules. Besides, controversy sells books. If Kim wants to make this a fight, we'll give him a war. They spent the next 2 hours discussing contracts, timelines, and marketing strategies. Ifeoma watched Minjun and Jinwoo work together with the easy synchronization of old friends, finishing each other's sentences and challenging each other's ideas with affectionate, brutal honesty. She found herself relaxing for the first time since landing in Seoul, feeling the tight knot of anxiety in her chest slowly loosening. When they finally emerged from Jinwoo's office, night had fully claimed Seoul. The Itaewon streets pulsed with energy. International restaurants, clubs pumping bass-heavy music, tourists and locals mixing in ways that felt more fluid than other Seoul neighborhoods. "Hungry?" Minjun asked as they stood on the sidewalk, the November cold biting through Ifeoma's jacket. She should have said no, should have gone home to her tiny apartment, processed everything that had happened, maintained the professional distance that was already eroding too fast. But the adrenaline of the day had left her restless, and the thought of sitting alone with her anxiety felt unbearable. "Starving," she admitted. Minjun took her to a small Nigerian restaurant tucked down a side street, a place she'd somehow never discovered in 6 months of living in Seoul. The owner, a woman named Amara who'd married a Korean man 15 years ago, greeted them with the kind of warmth that made Ifeoma's throat tighten. Finally, a sister. Amara pulled Ifeoma into a hug that smelled like home, palm oil and memories. "I've been telling Minjun he needs to bring more interesting people to my restaurant." They settled into a corner booth, and Amara brought them plates of jollof rice and plantains without asking what they wanted. The first bite made Ifeoma close her eyes, transported briefly back to her mother's kitchen in Lagos, to a version of herself who still believed the world was fair. "How did you find this place?" she asked Minjun. "Jinwoo brought me here after I told him I was adopted." Minjun picked at his food, his usual composure showing cracks. "He said I needed to understand what it felt like to be foreign in Korea, even when you look Korean. Amara's been teaching me." "Teaching you what?" "That belonging isn't about blood or biology. It's about choosing where you plant your roots." He looked up, and in the dim restaurant light, his eyes held a vulnerability that made Ifeoma's breath catch. "I've spent 28 years trying to be Korean enough. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect obedience to every expectation. And today I realized I've been trying to earn something that should have been mine by default. Ifeoma set down her fork. Min June. Your manuscript did that, he continued. The protagonist's journey, discovering her birth parents gave her up not from poverty, but shame. It's my story. Different details, same wound. His voice cracked. How did you know to write it like that? I interviewed dozens of Korean adoptees in America. Every single one talked about that specific fear, that they weren't abandoned because of circumstances, but because they were fundamentally unacceptable. Ifeoma reached across the table, her hand covering his. But that's not your truth, Minjun. Whatever reasons your birth parents had, they weren't about your worth. His hand turned under hers, fingers intertwining. The contact sent electricity up her arm, a sensation she immediately tried to rationalize away. This was gratitude, adrenaline, the intensity of a shared traumatic day, not attraction, not the dangerous beginning of something she'd sworn to avoid. But then Minjun's thumb traced across her knuckles, and the gentle deliberateness of the gesture made her heart stutter. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. When I first read your manuscript, I didn't just see good writing. I saw someone who understood what it feels like to be erased while standing in plain sight. And I thought, if she can write this honestly about pain she didn't personally experience, what kind of courage does she have? Minjun, today wasn't about courage. It was about me losing control in a corporate meeting. No, he said firmly. Today was about you refusing to perform the grateful foreign woman act that everyone expected. That was the bravest thing I've seen in years. His grip tightened on her hand, and it made me realize I've been performing too. The dutiful Korean son, the ambitious editor, the adopted child who's so grateful he never questions anything. Ifeoma wanted to pull her hand away, to reestablish the professional boundaries that were dissolving too fast. But his touch felt like an anchor in the chaos of the day, and she wasn't ready to let go yet. So, what happens now? She asked. You've lost your job. I'm about to be blacklisted, and we're both holding manuscripts that Seoul's publishing establishment wants buried. Minjun smiled, and there was something reckless and beautiful in his expression. Now we stop performing, stop apologizing, stop making ourselves smaller to fit into spaces that were never built for us. He paused. And we publish your book in a way that forces everyone to pay attention. Before Ifeoma could respond, her phone buzzed with another message from Daniel. Against her better judgment, she looked. I'm in Seoul. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Gangnam Station. Don't make me come find you. The world tilted sideways. Daniel was here, in her city, in her sanctuary, contaminating the one place she'd thought was safe from his manipulation. What's wrong? Minjun saw her reaction immediately. Daniel's in Seoul. Ifeoma's voice came out hollow. He's demanding to meet tomorrow. Minjun's expression hardened. You don't have to see him. If I don't, he'll make things worse. He'll show up at my apartment, contact Jinwoo, find ways to sabotage the book deal. Ifeoma felt panic rising in her chest. He always does this. Makes himself unavoidable, positions himself as the only solution to problems he created. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not, Ifeoma. Minjun's use of her first name still felt intimate, boundary crossing. You're not facing this alone. Not anymore. The certainty in his voice almost broke her. She'd spent 3 years building walls high enough to keep everyone out, convinced that isolation was safer than trust. But Minjun was offering something she'd forgotten existed. Partnership. The possibility of not carrying everything alone. Why are you doing this? The question came out raw, vulnerable. You don't owe me anything. We barely know each other. Maybe that's exactly why, Minjun said. Because I'm choosing this. Choosing you, without obligation or expectation, or any of the complicated history that usually tangles people together. This is just me recognizing someone worth standing beside. Amara appeared with more plantains and a knowing smile. You two need anything else? Besides the obvious? What's the obvious? Ifeoma asked. To stop pretending this is just about a manuscript. Amara's laugh was warm and slightly wicked. I've been watching people fall in love in my restaurant for 15 years. I know the signs. We're not, Ifeoma started, but Minjun squeezed her hand gently, and the words died in her throat. They left the restaurant an hour later, stepping into Seoul's night with their fingers still intertwined. Neither of them acknowledged it, as if speaking the physical contact would force them to explain something neither was ready to define. Minjun walked her toward the subway station, their pace slow despite the cold. Ifeoma found herself studying his profile in the streetlight, the serious set of his jaw, the way he removed his glasses when he was thinking, the vulnerability he tried to hide behind professional composure. I'm scared, she admitted suddenly. Of Daniel, of the meeting tomorrow, of what happens when the book gets published and everyone starts picking apart my life. Good. Minjun stopped walking, turning to face her. Fear means you're doing something that matters. Comfort is just another word for slow death. Before Ifeoma could respond, he reached up and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, almost reverent, and it sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the November cold. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we face Daniel together. And then we show Seoul what happens when people stop apologizing for their existence. Ifeoma should have stepped back, should have reestablished boundaries, should have remembered all the reasons why trusting someone new was dangerous. But standing on that Seoul sidewalk with Minjun's hand still touching her face, she felt something shift inside her. Not the collapse of walls, but the careful opening of a door she'd kept locked for 3 years. Together, she agreed. Minjun leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. When his lips brushed her forehead in a kiss that felt like a promise, Ifeoma closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe hope wasn't naive. Maybe it was revolutionary. They separated at the subway entrance, and Ifeoma descended into Seoul's underground labyrinth, feeling different than when she'd entered Director Kim's office that morning. Lighter somehow, despite everything she'd lost. Because for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't facing her battles alone. But as the train carried her toward Hongdae, her phone buzzed one final time. Another message from Daniel, just 2 words that made her blood run cold. She's coming. Ifeoma stared at the screen, her heart hammering. She. Daniel never used pronouns without purpose. Every word was calculated, weaponized, which meant whoever she was represented a new threat Ifeoma hadn't anticipated. The train emerged above ground, and through the window Seoul stretched endlessly under starless sky, beautiful and dangerous, and full of secrets that were about to detonate. Tomorrow she would face Daniel. Tomorrow she would learn who else had joined his campaign to destroy her. Tomorrow, everything she'd built in Seoul might collapse completely. But tonight, she still had Minjun's kiss on her forehead and a book deal that refused to die. Some days, that was enough to keep fighting. Who is she? And what does Daniel have planned for Ifeoma and Minjun? The stakes just got higher, and Seoul's about to get a lot more dangerous. Don't miss episode 2, where secrets explode, alliances are tested, and Ifeoma discovers that some battles can't be won alone. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next.